Greek fire. The year is 672. You are standing on the sea walls of Constantinople as an Arab fleet of 200 ships approaches through the darkness. The Byzantine defenders are outnumbered 5-1. Then, from small ships called dromons, streams of liquid fire erupt across the water. The fire does not just burn, it burns on water. It cannot be extinguished. Ships explode into flames. Men jump overboard, only to find the sea itself is burning. By dawn, the Arab fleet is annihilated. This was not just a weapon. It was a technological terror so effective that its formula was the most guarded secret in the medieval world. And when Constantinople fell 800 years later, that secret died with it. We still do not know exactly what Greek fire was. First documented use came in 672 AD during the first Arab siege of Constantinople. The weapon was credited to Callinicos of Heliopolis, a Syrian refugee who brought the knowledge to the Byzantine court. The Arab chronicler Theophanes recorded fire prepared in tubes destroying the fleet. Anna Komnene, the 12th century historian, described the siphon delivery system. Bronze tubes mounted on ship prows, shooting pressurized streams. Greek fire destroyed the second Arab naval assault during the siege of 717 to 718 AD. Constantine VII. Porphyrogenitos wrote that manufacturing knowledge was restricted to the imperial family only. 12 Byzantine emperors maintained secrecy over 700 years, death penalty for revealing the formula. Historical accounts describe fire that clung to objects and burned even underwater. Modern analysis of a 10th century manuscript, the Liber Ignium, or Book of Fires, suggests components might have included naphtha, quicklime, and sulfur, but no complete formula survives. Last known production ended with the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Military historians suggest Greek fire was likely a petroleum-based mixture, possibly including naphtha from natural oil seeps, combined with quicklime that ignited on contact with water, plus resin to make it sticky. The siphon technology was simply advanced plumbing with pressurized delivery. The secrecy worked because manufacturing was centralized, and recipes were never written down in detail. When the empire fell, the knowledge died with the artisans who made it. But this explanation does not account for why no other civilization, Arab, Venetian, or Genoese, despite centuries of naval warfare and espionage, ever successfully replicated it. The Byzantines fought against Islamic forces who had access to naphtha sources and advanced chemistry. Venice stole almost every other Byzantine technology. Yet, Greek fire remained unique. Modern attempts using historical descriptions have created flammable mixtures, but none match the accounts of burning underwater or being completely unquenchable. Some weapons historians and chemists wonder if Greek fire incorporated an unknown catalyst or chemical process that was not rediscovered until modern times. The 2006 discovery of a Byzantine manuscript fragment suggesting sea fire had components that reacted with salt water raises questions. Could the Byzantines have accidentally discovered something closer to thermite reactions or phosphorus chemistry centuries early? Why did no neighboring empire successfully reverse engineer it despite 700 years of warfare? What exactly made it continue burning on water when modern petroleum fires extinguish? Was the formula deliberately destroyed, or did the knowledge simply die with the last artisans? From the burning waters of Constantinople, we travel north to the frozen fjords of Scandinavia, where an entirely different impossibility was being forged into blade form. Ulfbert swords. You are excavating a Norse warrior's grave when the soil reveals a long iron sword. Brushing away the dirt from the blade, you see it, plus VLFBERH plus T, the inscription that makes archaeologists go quiet. This is not just any Viking sword. This is an Ulfbert, and the steel it is made from should not exist in medieval Europe. The metallurgy required would not be developed for another 800 years during the Industrial Revolution. Over 170 Ulfbert swords have been discovered across northern Europe since the 1800s. First scientific metallurgical analysis conducted in the 1960s revealed shocking composition. These were Viking-era swords made with crucible steel technology, requiring furnace temperatures of 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, precise carbon content of 1.0 to 1.2%, industrial scale facilities, and knowledge that supposedly did not exist in Europe until the 1700s. 170 plus Ulfbert swords found across Scandinavia, Russia, and Ukraine, dating from 800 to 1000 AD. Metallurgical analysis by Dr. Alan Williams in 2012 confirmed crucible steel composition. Carbon content 1.0 to 1.2%, 3 times higher than typical Viking blades. European blast furnaces capable of this did not exist until the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s to 1800s. The +5 LFBERH plus T inscription pattern appears on blades from Norway to the Volga River. Some counterfeit Ulfberts have been found with lower quality iron, suggesting the original blades were highly prized. The 2008 documentary Secrets of the Viking Sword traced possible crucible steel origins to Persia or India. Modern blacksmith Richard Furrer required a 2,000-degree Fahrenheit furnace to replicate the steel. Archaeologists and metallurgists propose that Ulfbert swords were made from imported crucible steel ingots, traded from the Middle East or India along Viking trade routes. The Volga route connected Scandinavia to Islamic metallurgical centers in Persia, where crucible steel, called vuts, was already being produced. Viking smiths simply reforged this imported steel into sword blades, stamping them with the Ulfbert mark as a quality brand. The technology was not European, it was imported, but this raises more questions than it answers. Why would Middle Eastern or Indian steelmakers export their most advanced metallurgical product to Viking traders in massive quantities, enough for 170 plus surviving blades, suggesting thousands were made? The trade route explanation also does not explain the specific plus VLFBERH plus T inscription pattern that appears nowhere in the Islamic world. And if Vikings were simply reforging imported steel, why do we find no intermediate examples, no failed attempts, no learning curve in the archaeological record? Some researchers propose that small-scale crucible steel production may have been independently developed in scattered locations across Europe, possibly in monastic workshops with access to advanced texts from the classical world. The consistent quality and inscription suggest a single master smith or small workshop that guarded the technique jealously, creating a brand that others attempted to counterfeit. Who was Ulfbert? A master smith, a workshop brand, or a trading mark? How did Viking-era craftsmen maintain such precise carbon content without modern measurement tools? Why does the technology appear fully formed with no developmental examples? From the frozen north to the scorching deserts, another steel mystery awaits, one wrapped in patterns that modern science still struggles to explain. Damascus steel. The blade catches the light and reveals itself. Flowing patterns ripple across the steel like water frozen mid-current, like wood grain in metal, like waves drawn by an invisible hand. This is Damascus steel, and for 1,500 years, swords forged with this technique were considered the finest weapons in the world. They could slice through European broadswords like butter, stay sharp through countless battles, and flex without breaking. Then, around 1750, the knowledge of how to make them simply vanished. Modern metallurgists with electron microscopes and particle accelerators still cannot fully replicate what ancient smiths achieved in firelit workshops. Wootz steel production in India traces back to 300 BC. Damascus blades were produced in the Middle East from imported Indian Wootz ingots from around 300 AD to 1750 AD. Modern scientific analysis began in the 1980s and 90s. Woot's steel production in India dates to 300 BC, exported as ingots to Damascus forging centers. The distinctive wavy pattern, Muhammad's ladder, rose, Kirk Nardubin, is visible on blade surfaces. Production mysteriously ceased around 1750 AD. The last known Damascus blades were made in the mid-18th century. A 2006 study by Reibold and colleagues published in Nature discovered carbon nanotubes in authentic Damascus steel. Cementite nanowires were found in blade structure, contributing to strength and flexibility. Modern attempts using crucible steel produce similar patterns, but not identical mechanical properties. Theory suggests specific trace elements in Indian ore, vanadium and chromium, were essential to nanowire formation. A 1996 analysis by Verhoeven and Pendry achieved close replication, but required rare ore composition. Metallurgists explain that Damascus steel's properties resulted from a specific combination of high-carbon Indian Woot steel and the forging techniques used in Damascus workshops. The patterns emerged naturally from the distribution of carbides in the steel during repeated heating and hammering. The technique was lost because the specific ore mines in India that produced the right composition of trace elements, vanadium and chromium, were depleted by 1750. Without those exact raw materials, the process could not be maintained. Modern science has identified the key components. Carbon nanotubes form during cooling cycles, but lacks the precise ore chemistry. But this explanation struggles with the sophistication of the process. Ancient smiths had no knowledge of nanostructures or carbon chemistry, yet they consistently produced blades with nanowire reinforcement through empirical techniques alone. The specific heating cycles, quenching temperatures, and forging rhythms required to create these nanostructures are incredibly precise. How did they discover this exact process through trial and error? And why, if it was purely ore-dependent, did smiths not simply source alternative ores when Indian mines depleted? Some materials scientists wonder if the Damascus forging tradition preserved a much older metallurgical knowledge system, possibly inherited from earlier civilizations, that understood metal properties through observation rather than theory. The ritualistic aspects of Damascus forging, specific prayers, timing, and quenching methods, might encode practical metallurgical wisdom in traditional form. Did ancient smiths somehow observe nanostructures, or was it purely empirical luck? Why did the tradition completely collapse rather than adapt to new ore sources? Are we missing a crucial step in the forging process that historical texts failed to record? From steel patterns forged on Earth, we turn to metal that fell from the heavens, and the blade that accompanied a god king into eternity. Tutankhamun's meteorite dagger. November 1925. Howard Carter unwraps the mummy of a boy king who died 3,300 years ago. Among the golden treasures, 2 daggers, 1 gold, 1 iron. But iron in Egypt at this time should be rarer than gold. The Bronze Age is still dominant. Iron smelting is barely known. Yet this blade, with its gold hilt and crystal pommel, sits at the pharaoh's side. For 90 years, Egyptologists assumed it was a rare early iron artifact. Then in 2016, X-ray fluorescence analysis revealed the truth. The blade was not mined from Earth. It came from space. Discovered by Howard Carter in 1925 during excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb, designated KV-62, wrapped in the mummy's wrappings between ribcage and right thigh. Scientific analysis conducted in 2016 by Daniela Comelli and team using portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometry. Tutankhamun died in 1324 BC during the Egyptian Bronze Age when iron was extraordinarily rare. Dagger blade length 34.2 centimeters. Hilt of gold with crystal pommel. The 2016 XRF analysis by Comelli and colleagues was published in Meteoritics and Planetary Science, confirming composition. Nickel content 10.8%, cobalt 0.5, 8%, phosphorus 0.2%. Signature of octahedrite meteorite. Comparative analysis matched the Karga meteorite found 150 miles west of Alexandria. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs refer to iron from the sky, Ba-en-pet, suggesting they knew the source. Only 19 iron artifacts from Bronze Age Egypt exist. 9 are confirmed meteoric origin. Sophisticated cold working technique preserved iron quality without brittleness from overheating. Archaeologists and metallurgists explain that ancient Egyptians collected meteorites from the desert and recognized them as a divine material from the sky. Since iron smelting was poorly developed in Bronze Age Egypt, meteorites provided the only reliable source of iron. The metal was worked cold or with minimal heating to preserve its properties, suggesting they understood meteoric iron behaved differently than terrestrial iron. The blade demonstrates empirical metallurgical knowledge. They learned what worked through experience. Its placement in Tutankhamun's burial reflects the sacred status of sky metal rather than advanced technology. But the craftsmanship reveals something deeper. The blade shows no brittleness, no cracking, problems that plagued early iron smelting for centuries. Modern blacksmiths working with meteoric iron note, it is incredibly difficult to forge without fracturing due to irregular nickel distribution. Yet this dagger, made over 3,000 years ago, has perfect structural integrity. And the ancient Egyptians somehow knew to work it cold when European smiths 1,000 years later were still struggling with basic iron forging. How did they develop this specific knowledge? Some archaeometallurgists suggest the blade may represent knowledge transfer from a foreign culture with more advanced ironworking skills, possibly Hittite smiths who had early mastery of iron. The placement in a pharaoh's tomb might indicate it was a diplomatic gift from an advanced neighboring kingdom, bringing both the object and the knowledge of how to work this divine metal. How many meteorites did Egyptian smiths process to develop this cold working technique? Was this knowledge isolated to royal workshops or more widespread? Did they understand they were working extraterrestrial material or simply divine iron? From metal that fell from the sky, we cross an ocean to a civilization that weaponized volcanic glass into something that terrified the most heavily armored soldiers in the world. Maquahuitl. The year is 1521. You are a Spanish conquistador in steel plate armor riding a war horse, an animal the Aztecs have never seen before. Your horse makes you invincible. Then an Aztec warrior swings a wooden club studded with black glass shards. One strike. Your horse's head falls to the ground, severed clean through the neck. That weapon is the Maquahuitl, and the obsidian embedded in its edge is sharper than any steel blade you have ever seen. Documented in Spanish conquistador accounts from 1519 to 1521, Conquest of Mexico. Most detailed description by Bernal Diaz del Castillo in True History of the Conquest of New Spain, written in 1568. No complete physical examples survive. Wooden construction decayed. Bernal Diaz del Castillo wrote in 1568 that he saw an Indian fighting with a sword against a mounted horseman, and the Indian gave the horse of his antagonist such a stroke in the breast that he laid it open to the entrails, and it fell dead on the spot. Maquahuitl length, typically 3 to 4 feet. Wooden core, usually oak. Obsidian blades embedded along edges. Obsidian fractures at molecular level, creating edge only 3 nanometers thick. Scalpel steel is 300 nanometers. Spanish accounts describe inability to repair damaged armor after Maquahuitl strikes. Weapon used by Aztec warriors, Mixtecs, and earlier Mesoamerican cultures for 1,000 plus years. Modern electron microscope analysis of obsidian shows sharper edge than modern surgical steel. No complete examples survive. Wood and leather binding decayed. Obsidian blades found in archaeological sites. 2005 Experimental Archaeology by Dr. Lauren G. Pollock demonstrated Maquahuitl could cut through ballistic gelatin simulating flesh. Archaeologists explained the Maquahuitl's effectiveness through material science. Obsidian is volcanic glass that fractures conchoidally, creating extraordinarily sharp edges at the molecular level. The Aztecs had access to abundant obsidian from volcanic regions and developed sophisticated knapping techniques over centuries. The weapon's design, a wooden club with replaceable obsidian blades, combined impact force with cutting power. Spanish horses, never having encountered such weapons, were vulnerable. The shock value came from Europeans' assumption that primitive stone weapons could not match steel, when in fact obsidian's sharpness exceeds steel. But this does not explain the psychological impact or the specific engineering. Spanish conquistadors had fought against steel swords, pikes, and halberds across Europe. They understood sharp weapons. Yet their accounts describe the Macuahuitl with a specific terror, not just respect for an enemy weapon, but shock at what seemed impossible. And the engineering question remains: how did Mesoamericans, working without metal tools or written mathematical systems, develop the optimal blade angle, spacing, and binding technique to maximize obsidian's sharpness while minimizing breakage? Some archaeologists studying Mesoamerican technology suggest the Macuahuitl represents a sophisticated understanding of material properties that parallels modern composite engineering. The combination of flexible wood core, rigid obsidian cutting edges, and leather binding creates a weapon that is more than the sum of its parts, a concept that would not appear in European weapons design for centuries. How many generations of trial and error led to the optimal Macuahuitl design? Did the knowledge of obsidian working come from a single innovation or develop independently across Mesoamerica? What other technologies did Mesoamericans develop using obsidian that did not survive? From obsidian knapped by hand, we return across the Atlantic to the Mediterranean, where the greatest mind of the ancient world supposedly turned sunlight itself into a weapon. Archimedes' death ray. The year is 212 BC. You are a Roman naval commander approaching the walls of Syracuse. Your fleet of galleys is unstoppable until the ships start burning. Not from flaming arrows or Greek fire, but from focused sunlight. The mathematician Archimedes, defending his city, has supposedly arranged mirrors on the harbor walls to concentrate the sun's rays into beams of heat that ignite wooden ships from a distance. Impossible, say modern physicists. Except when they tested it, sometimes it worked. Described in ancient sources by Lucian, Galen, and later Byzantine historians. Modern attempts to verify began in 1973 with Ioannis Sakkas, continued with MIT in 2005, and Mythbusters television show in 2004 to 2006. Siege of Syracuse from 213 to 212. BC ended with the city's fall. Archimedes killed by Roman soldier. Ancient historian Lucian, 2nd century AD, describes burning mirrors used to defend Syracuse. Byzantine historian Tsetses, 12th century, claimed Archimedes used hexagonal mirrors to focus sunlight. 1973 experiment by Greek scientist Ioannis Sakkas used 70 flat mirrors focused on wooden boat 50 meters away. It ignited in minutes. 2005 MIT students test with 127 mirrors set wooden ship replica on fire at 30 meters in 10 minutes. Mythbusters 2004 attempt declared busted using parabolic mirrors at distance. Mythbusters 2006 retry succeeded in setting wood on fire, but deemed impractical in battle. Physics consensus says theoretically possible with optimal conditions, but militarily impractical. Military historians and physicists largely dismiss the death ray as myth or exaggeration. While focused sunlight can ignite materials, the battlefield conditions, moving ships, variable sun angle, requiring dozens of perfectly positioned mirrors, make it impractical. Ancient sources describing Archimedes' weapons, like cranes that grabbed ships and catapults, are well documented. The burning mirrors appear only in later, less reliable accounts, written centuries after the siege. The story likely grew from Archimedes' real defensive innovations. The claw of Archimedes' crane weapon is well attested. the story likely mixed with legendary embellishment. But the modern experiments reveal something unexpected. It actually works. Not as a rapid-fire weapon, but as a psychological terror weapon, it is plausible. A wooden ship set ablaze from an invisible source would create panic and confusion. And Archimedes was the greatest mathematician and engineer of antiquity. The man who discovered buoyancy principles, calculated pi, and designed siege weapons that terrified Rome. If anyone in the ancient world could calculate the focal length and mirror angles needed, it would be him. Why do we assume he could not? Some historians of science propose a middle ground. Archimedes may have demonstrated the principle as a proof of concept or psychological weapon, even if it was not the primary defense. The few accounts of burning mirrors might record a real experimental weapon that saw limited use. Memorable enough to be recorded, impractical enough that it did not become standard siege defense. Did Archimedes actually build and deploy mirrors? Or is this entirely legendary? If he attempted it, was it meant as a practical weapon or a terror tactic? How many bronze mirrors would Syracuse have had available to even test the concept? From focused light to focused craftsmanship, we travel east to the steppes of Central Asia, where a bow design conquered continents for 3,000 years with exactly the same engineering. Composite bow stand on the steppes of Central Asia in 1200 AD. A Mongol rider approaches at full gallop, standing in his stirrups. At 200 meters, he releases an arrow. It punches through your chainmail and kills you before you can draw your own longbow. How? The weapon in his hand is half the size of yours, yet it can shoot farther, penetrate deeper, and be fired from horseback at full speed. This is the composite bow, 3 materials laminated into one, and it dominated warfare across 3 continents for over 3,000 years with exactly the same design. Earliest composite bow fragments from Andronovo culture, Kazakhstan, dated 2800 BC, used by Scythians, Parthians, Huns, Mongols, Turks, Persians, dominated until gunpowder weapons. Earliest evidence from Andronovo culture, Kazakhstan, radiocarbon dated 2800 BC. 3-layer construction, horn on compression side, sinew on tension side, wood core, always in this order. Mongol composite bow draw, weight 150 plus pounds. Effective range 500 plus yards. Penetrated armor at 200 yards. 1 year minimum construction time. Wood must season. Sinew must dry. Horn must cure. Hide glue applied. Used by Scythians 800 BC. Parthians 247 BC to 224 AD. Huns 4th to 5th century AD. Mongols 13th century. Same design across cultures. Double curved recurve shape. Rigid Siah ear tips. Modern experimental archaeology by Dr. Adam Karpowicz confirmed historical range and power claims. Required specialized knowledge passed through master-apprentice training. No trial and error learning possible. Military historians explain that the composite bow emerged in the steppes because nomadic horse warriors needed maximum power in minimum size. The 3-material laminate naturally arose from available materials: horn from livestock, sinew from hunted game, wood from sparse trees. The design worked so well that once perfected, there was no reason to change it. The geographic spread followed nomadic migrations and conquest. Scythians, Huns, and Mongols carried the technology across Eurasia. Similar independent development in different regions occurred because the physical principles, horn compression and sinew tension, are universal. But the consistency is uncanny. From Hungarian plains to Manchurian forests, across cultures with no written contact, the same 3-layer sequence, same recurve angles, same rigid ear tips. Even the construction techniques, the specific animal glues, the seasoning times, the humidity control, match across thousands of miles. Simple parallel innovation should show variation, experimentation, regional adaptations. Instead, we see uniformity, as if a single blueprint spread across the ancient world and was preserved with ritual precision. Some archaeologists studying steppe cultures propose that composite bow knowledge may have been carried by specialized craftsmen who traveled between nomadic groups, creating a distributed network of standardized knowledge, similar to medieval guild systems, that maintained quality control across vast distances. The bow's construction was so complex and unforgiving that experimentation led to failure, reinforcing traditional methods. How did the identical design reach from Hungary to Korea without variation? What happened to all the failed experimental bows from the learning period? Why did no culture develop a successful four-layer or alternative laminate composite? From the weapon that required a year to build, we descend into India to meet a blade so deadly that mastering it took 12 years. Not to kill enemies, but to avoid killing yourself. Urumi, you face a master wielding what looks like a belt hanging from his fist. Then he moves. The belt becomes a blur. A 4-foot spring steel whip moving faster than you can track, wrapping around your sword, your arm, your throat. This is the Urumi, the flexible sword of Kerala, and it is the most dangerous weapon ever created, as deadly to its wielder as to the enemy. Ancient martial texts warn that a student must master every other weapon first, then train for 12 years before even attempting the Urumi. Get it wrong, and you decapitate yourself. Originated in Kerala, South India. Mentioned in Dhanurveda martial texts. Still taught in Kalaripayattu martial arts schools today. Earliest confirmed reference 16th century, but likely older. Length typically 4 to 5 feet. Width 1 to 2 inches. Spring-tempered, flexible steel. Dhanurveda, ancient Indian martial text, lists Urumi as most difficult weapon, mastered last. Modern Kalaripayattu schools require 7 to 12 years prior weapons training before Urumi instruction. Can be worn as belt, unfurls for combat. Some versions have 2 to 4 parallel blades, flexible enough to wrap around opponent's weapon or limb, then cut when pulled taut. Tempering process creates steel that flexes without breaking, but holds sharp edge. 2010 documentary Deadliest Warrior tested Urumi, penetrated armor, severed ballistic gel targets. Still taught today in Kerala martial schools. Videos show masters wielding it in fluid, deadly arcs. Martial historians explain the Urumi as the pinnacle of Indian flexible weapon development. Kerala's advanced metallurgical tradition, which also produced Wootz steel, enabled spring tempering of high-carbon steel. The weapon emerged from martial arts culture that prized difficulty and skill demonstration. The 12-year training requirement reflects both the genuine danger and the cultural value of mastery. It is effective precisely because it is unpredictable. The flexible blade creates angles of attack impossible with rigid swords. The tempering is sophisticated, but understandable metallurgy. But no other weapon culture developed anything similar. Flexible weapons exist globally. Chain whips in China, flails in Europe. But none combined whip flexibility with sword sharpness. The metallurgical knowledge to create steel that flexes repeatedly without fatiguing or losing its edge is extraordinarily specific. European spring steel was not developed until the 17th century. How did Kerala smiths in the 1500s or earlier achieve the precise carbon content and tempering cycle needed? Some weapons researchers propose that the Urumi preserved an even older metallurgical tradition from southern India's early steelmaking culture. The knowledge may have been part of a larger body of advanced materials science that was gradually lost, with the Urumi surviving because it was protected within martial arts lineages that transmitted the knowledge orally and practically. What percentage of students historically survived Urumi training? How many smiths knew the specific tempering process, or was it centralized knowledge? Were there earlier, more widespread flexible blade weapons that did not survive? From a single deadly ribbon of steel, we shift to Korea and a weapon that launched not one projectile, but 200 simultaneously. Hwacha. The year is 1593. You are a Japanese samurai in the invasion force marching on Seoul. Your army has crushed Korean defenses for months. Then you see Korean soldiers loading a cart with what looks like dozens of tubes angled toward you. In 60 seconds, 200 flaming arrows erupt simultaneously, turning the sky black. You cannot outrun them. You cannot block them. This is the Hwacha, Korea's rocket artillery, and in one volley it can destroy an entire battalion. Invented 1409 AD during Joseon Dynasty by Korean military engineers. Most famous deployment at Battle of Hangju in 1593 against Japanese invasion. Modern reconstructions tested by South Korean military. Invented 1409 AD by Korean military engineers during Joseon Dynasty. First Singijeon fire arrows rockets. Standard Hwacha had wooden cart with 200 launching tubes arranged in rows. Ammunition were Singijeon rockets. Bamboo arrow with gunpowder propellant tube attached. Battle of Hangju in February 1593 saw 3,400 Korean defenders defeat 30,000 Japanese using Hwachas. Historical records describe rain of fire creating panic, burning, and routing Japanese samurai forces. Effective range approximately 450 meters, nearly 500 yards. Reload time under 1 minute with trained crew. 2008 South Korean military reconstruction tests confirmed historical range and devastating area effect. Used continuously by Korean military until late 19th century. Replicas in South Korean museums today. Military historians explain the Hwacha as an innovative but straightforward application of gunpowder rocket technology that China had already developed. Korea adapted Chinese fire arrows into a multiple launch system by mounting many tubes on a wheeled cart. The effectiveness came from volume of fire. 200 rockets create saturation bombardment that is psychologically terrifying and tactically effective against massed infantry. The technology was practical 15th century engineering using available materials, bamboo, wood, basic black powder. But the engineering sophistication is remarkable. Launching 200 rockets simultaneously without the cart catching fire, exploding, or tipping over required precise angle calculations, fireproof materials, and timing mechanisms. Each rocket needed identical propellant loads for consistent range. The reload speed suggests modular ammunition design, and this was 1409, before European militaries developed anything comparable. The Katyusha rocket launcher used by Soviets in World War II, often called Stalin's organ, employed the same multi-launch principle 530 years later. Some military historians studying Korean innovation suggest the Hwacha represents a sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare combined with practical engineering. The weapon was designed not primarily for accuracy, but for terror, creating a visual and auditory spectacle that broke enemy morale. This understanding of psychological impact in weapon design is remarkably modern. How many Hwachas were produced, and how widespread was deployment? What was the accident rate during development and combat use? Did Korean engineers develop targeting mathematics or rely on empirical adjustment? From a weapon that fired 200 projectiles in 60 seconds, we travel to China to meet a crossbow that could fire 10 bolts in 15 seconds, and did so for 2,000 years. Chuko Nu stand on a Chinese battlefield in 208 AD at the Battle of Red Cliffs. A row of soldiers holds wooden crossbows with rectangular boxes mounted on top. They pump lever handles rapidly, clack, 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 10 bolts in 15 seconds. No reloading, no pausing. The mechanical rhythm is hypnotic and deadly. This is the Chuko Nu, the repeating crossbow, and it served Chinese armies for over 2,000 years, from the Warring States period through the First Sino-Japanese War. It was still in use when machine guns were invented. Attributed to engineer Zhuge Liang, 181 to 234 AD, but archaeological evidence suggests earlier origin in 4th century BC. Used continuously until 1895. Surviving examples in museums worldwide. Earliest evidence from 4th century BC Warring States period. Tomb reliefs show crossbow designs. traditionally attributed to Zhuge Liang, 181 to 234 AD, who may have perfected existing design. Magazine holds 10 bolts, pump-action lever cocks, loads, and fires in one motion. Firing rate approximately 10 bolts in 15 seconds. Sacrifice power for rate of fire. Effective range 70 to 80 meters versus 300 plus for regular crossbows. Designed for volume fire. Battle of Red Cliffs in 208. AD records describe repeating crossbows used by Shu Han forces. Continuously used by Chinese military through Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279, Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644. Last military use documented in First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895. Still issued 2,000 years after invention. Surviving examples in British Museum, Metropolitan Museum, Beijing museums. Military historians explain the Chuko Nu as an ingenious but limited weapon. The magazine-fed mechanism sacrificed bolt power and range for firing speed, making it effective for close-range defensive positions or massed volleys against charging infantry. Chinese armies valued it because it required less training than traditional crossbows and created suppressive fire. The long service life reflects Chinese military conservatism and the weapon's niche effectiveness. It was not obsolete, just specialized. Similar repeating weapons appeared elsewhere, like Roman repeating Ballista, but did not persist. But 2,000 years. Consider that. The Chuko Nu was in active military service longer than firearms have existed. It outlasted the Roman Empire, survived the Mongol invasions, and was still being issued when Gatling guns and Maxim machine guns were being developed. And its mechanical sophistication, a gravity-fed magazine, integrated cocking and loading system, would not reappear in firearms until the 19th century. How did an ancient Chinese engineer create a repeating weapon mechanism that remained viable for 2 millennia? Some historians of technology propose that the Chuko Nu's longevity reveals something about Chinese technological philosophy: refinement of working designs over radical innovation. Rather than pursuing higher power weapons, Chinese arsenals perfected a reliable, manufacturable system that filled a tactical role. The weapon's survival suggests it was never truly obsolete. It just evolved into a specialized tool as warfare changed around it. How many Chuko Nu were manufactured over 2,000 years of production? Did the design remain static, or were there incremental improvements over centuries? Why did no other culture develop and maintain a similar repeating weapon? These are not just 10 weapons. They are 10 impossibilities. Greek fire that burned on water and vanished from human knowledge. Viking swords with steel 8 centuries ahead of their time. Damascus blades with carbon nanotubes that modern science struggles to replicate. An Egyptian pharaoh buried with a blade from space. Aztec warriors wielding volcanic glass sharper than surgical steel. Archimedes burning ships with sunlight. A bow design that conquered continents for 3,000 years without changing. An Indian whip sword that required 12 years just to avoid killing yourself. Korean rocket artillery launching 200 projectiles simultaneously in the year 1409. A Chinese repeating crossbow that served for 2 millennia. The mainstream explanation follows a pattern: trade routes, parallel innovation, natural materials, empirical trial and error, knowledge passed through apprenticeships, and for each individual weapon, these explanations work. But step back and look at all 10 together, and a different pattern emerges. These weapons represent knowledge that appeared, persisted with remarkable consistency, then vanished completely. Greek fire's formula died when Constantinople fell. Damascus steel ceased when ore deposits depleted. The Ulfbert technique disappeared with Viking expansion. The Macuahuitl vanished with the Aztec Empire. The Urumi survives only in isolated martial schools. Some technologies advance linearly. Each generation builds on the last. But weapons technology seems to move in cycles. Peak capabilities appear, plateau for centuries, then collapse. Sometimes they are rediscovered, sometimes they are not. Most people walk through museums, see ancient weapons under glass, and think primitive. They see stone blades and assume inferiority. They see wood and bronze and cannot imagine effectiveness. They accept the story of inevitable progress, that we are smarter, more capable, more advanced than everyone who came before. But you made it here. You have seen the evidence. You understand that history is not a steady climb toward enlightenment. It is a series of rises and falls, discoveries and losses, knowledge gained and knowledge forgotten. History is not written by the victors. It is written by whoever is still around to hold the pen. And sometimes the pen lies. The swords do not. The steel remembers what the scrolls forgot. From fire that burned water to blades forged from stars, from mirrors that weaponized light to steel ribbons that danced death, these weapons are not relics of primitive savagery. They are evidence of mastery. We did not invent sophistication. We inherited it, lost it, and we are still trying to remember what they knew. The weapons are still here. The knowledge is not. Maybe it is time we asked why.